one of the things here that we kind of want to stress is that there's not this black and white, dual distinction between intelligence activities and psychological warfare and all that, all those shenanigans. Those aren't divided from kind of business activities, what you consider to be normal business.
Business as usual. Yeah.
It's really, that's kind of a false distinction that I think people get tripped up by. But really, the more that you look at it, the more that you realize that those two things are actually the same thing.
Yeah, again, there's kind of this notion that the covert side of things kind of corrupts normal business. I think the real takeaway is that this isn't corruption. And I think we drove that home pretty well in the Iran-Contra episode. But what we're dealing with isn't you have a system and these outsiders kind of penetrate it and transform it into what they want. This is pretty integral and baked in to the system itself as it develops over time.
And so, this ended up with us going back, trying to reconstruct a lot of these things about corporate law, and where does the Panama corporate law code come from? Where does it come from in the U.S.? And we talked about that before, that Sullivan and Cromwell had been involved in getting the New Jersey corporate law passed in the 1890s, and then we've gone even further back here. And I guess the natural place that we decided to start is we want to talk about the French SA company, as it's called, which stands for Société Anonyme.
Yeah, anonymous society.
That's so fitting.
Yeah, effectively secret society,
Yeah, that's what I love about it. It's if you look at Panama corporations today, that's what they are. They're SA companies, which literally comes from this French civil code. It's the 1804 Code Civil. That is what is used by all these shell corporations that are formed in Panama. Is that they're all instituted and incorporated under the SA form, which goes all the way back to the 1840.
Right, and circumstances of how it kind of emerged were fairly murky from the stuff you were telling me. There's one person who did a bunch of outcome of the process would be the formation of a general cartel. The whole of capitalist production would then be consciously regulated by a single body which would determine the volume of production in all branches of industry. Price determination become a purely nominal matter, involving only the distribution of the total product between the cartel magnates on one side and all the members of society on the other. Price would then cease to become the outcome of factual relationships into which people have entered and would become a mere accounting device by which things were allocated among people. And so it's kind of a fantastical image because, on paper, what he's describing is one company that controls everything. But I think it's, in a way, we can kind of think of that through this like board image that we're describing. The general cartel doesn't need to be one company that controls everything. All you need is a series of companies who are interlocked through the social relations of the board and also ownership structures, which often kind of move
through the shares that the shareholdings that each of them have in one another.
So when I read the general cartel in Hilferding, this is what I picture. It's not so much a literal single cartel, but kind of this more kind of invisible structure of, dense webs of ownership and social relations.
Yeah, and this kind of, obviates kind of the false idea of competition, because that's what part of the innovation here is that it means that you don't have to really compete with your rivals anymore in business.
Yeah.
Because you actually can set up a company to do something, and then all of the people who participate in that industry, they can all invest in a proportion, that they think is appropriate, and get ownership of that company, and they can all be board members of it. And then, they're coordinating through doing this. They're not, it allows them to not have to compete with one another. There's something we mentioned, like all the oil stuff and like these big oil companies and how they wanted to set up a cartel because they were, all kind of sick personally of, the level of kind of industrial warfare that was breaking out between them, is that they wanted to set up just that, a central kind of cartel that they could all buy into, right? And they could, determine the relative risks of it and be like, I'm going to get 25% or whatever of this central company. And then, they're able to that way mitigate kind of their relative risks and rewards for engaging in an enterprise. And then, they don't have to compete with their rivals anymore.
Yeah, and this was kind of seen as like a threat to the public in a lot of places when this first started happening. Like, they're going to meet at FBI offices to like arrange missile cells to the Middle East. And I really do wonder like if this is going to Afghanistan or Iran, because the Red Era missiles are the equivalent to the TOW missiles that we end up selling to Iran later on. Let's see, what else does he do? He goes to Panama where he meets with Noriega's people. And this is all in his testimony. You can read all of this. And he talks about how he encountered Mossad when, he's meeting with Noriega, and then talks about how Noriega's people had him meet with representatives of the Medellin cartel who are wanting to buy anti-aircraft missiles. And then somehow in the midst of all this, he manages to start his own training camp in Alabama. It has some famous veterans who graduated from it. Some of them include a group of Klan members who tried to invade the Dominican Republic in the early 1980s. Another one was a group of Sikh terrorists who blew up a civilian airliner. You can find descriptions of like what the training course is at campus. Like he has this whole thing where he tells us to Mitch McConnell in his testimony, which is what cracks me up, because Mitch McConnell is clearly horrified. He's just describing how like they just beat the shit out of people. Like, oh, we tear gas and we beat them, and you gotta run through the woods naked at night. And it's like this isn't even a training camp. You're just terrifying people.
This was like it's so crazy. It's like when we're just like sitting there contemplating what we're even looking at. It's like, basically like we're sitting around on like Saturday night looking at GeoCity like website for a mercenary training camp. Like
yeah, you can find like the GeoCity for it, and there's like pictures of like, so the graduates from this camp would be called the Death Merchants, and they would like come in the dead of the night and like terrorize like the new recruits. You can find them like stripping dudes naked and stuff on it. Like it's pretty fucked up stuff actually.
Yeah. I mean, this is...
Man. Got worked up with Frank Camper. He's still alive, by the way. He runs a computer shop.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe go hit him up for a new computer.
Yeah, get him on the pod.
I mean, it's like...
But...
I want to...
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
If you want to, I don't know, if you want to talk about, if there's anything you have left to say about civilian material systems...
Yeah. There's actually quite a few more little bits we could throw in. So that's where they're being trained. But they are also embedded, like they have a unit that's down in Nicaragua. Well, they have one at Costa Rica where they work at the ranch of a guy named John Hull. And John Hull's a really interesting character because Carlos later, who he mentioned, previously as a member of the Medellin cartel, he names John Hull as like a major cocaine trafficker into the U.S. And John Hull's ranch, as it's called, is like where all like the Contra support flights are going, but it's also like a major transit point for cocaine coming into America. And we have a few more things to say about that. He ends up killing a member of the civilian material assistance with a cooked heroin injection.
Jesus Christ.
That's in Camper's testimony. A guy named Stephen Carr who was arrested by the Costa Rican authorities and was going to talk. Hull puts a contract out on his life, and that's how he dies. More civilian material assistance people are down in Honduras, where they're part of a thing called Pegasus. And this is like they're training Contra Forces, this is the FDN, and they're doing like raids into Nicaragua. And one of these raids, they have like a helicopter with missile pods, and they're like doing these raids on these camps, and they have like all these FBI files that talk about how they were like plotting to blow up a hydroelectric plant and like shut the country's power off. Just like, it's just insane, out of control stuff. But on this raid, like one of their helicopter gets shot down, 2 people die, and the final CMA member who lives, a guy named Dana Parker, shoots himself in the head to avoid capture. So this is like full-blown insane warfare at this point. And it's revealed that Parker is a member of something called the 20th Special Forces Group. And the FBI documents that I got also, they specify that there's like deep interrelations between civilian material assistance and the 20th Special Forces Group. Which makes sense because there's something called Operation Quail Shooter, which was where the 20th... Yeah, this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll kick it over to you.
No, it's just like, this is amazing, because it really is like, this is like a weird kind of thing that is really happening. We were like going and looking at like the org structure of like, these special forces unit, like Fort Benning and stuff, and like, look.
There was a mission in the Helmand River Valley on that same trip. And if I'm going to tell this story, I want to tell it in its entirety. The Helmand River Valley was always kind of like a hot spot. Obama had like authorized this general for like a troop surge, one final push into Afghanistan. But because the war was ending, they had started tightening up the rules of engagement, making it harder to shoot enemies, but also like specific targets were like near impossible. You couldn't shoot a building without direct authorization from like the guy in charge of all of Afghanistan. I had been flying these Helmand River Valley missions for like 5 days in a row, and I wasn't expecting anything to happen because nothing had happened the 5 days previously. This ground party of Marines with their JTAC, they pushed down this little dirt road. This whole town that they were going into was kind of like sunken below the typical elevation of like the surrounding area. At the end of the road, there was like a wadi, like a creek, and on the side they had like a little bit of the wall of the like this town. As soon as like the first guy crossed that wall into the town, he started getting lit up by this 2-story mud brick building from like the top window. There was nowhere for these guys to go. Rules of engagement at the time was like, if they could, get out of there, don't engage the enemy, just like let sleeping dogs lie, whatever. They went up to the right, they'd go up that embankment, and their backs would be to this guy who was shooting at them. If they went back up the road, they would lose the cover of the wall because they basically walk up above it. And if they went into the creek, there was no guarantee that there wasn't a window on the other side of this 2-story that could just shoot them while they were crossing this creek. These guys were just stuck here behind this mud brick wall with these AKs. It was basically turning this wall into Swiss cheese while they were behind it, losing their cover. Oh God, this mission's hard to talk about. It's the only time I've heard a Joint Task Air Controller like lose his cool over the radio. He called up and he was just like, if you don't get rounds down right now, we're gonna die. And it's like, and I'm not doing justice to how it sounded because there was like a crack in his voice, and it was real like, you could hear like the sheer panic in this dude's voice. It was just the crack of it and everything. I had to sit there and watch because like these guys were in a building and we're not allowed to shoot buildings. We tried to tell the ground force commander like, hey, these guys are taking accurate fire, they can't retreat, we need to shoot this building. And he's like, I'm not giving you my authorization to strike that building. If there's civilians in there, that's on my head. We had an internal discussion on the crew, like we could declare self-defense for these guys, but if there's any civilians in there, we weren't willing to really accept that risk to put that on our own heads. We had to get in touch with headquarters back in Bagram and tell them what was going on, and then those guys had to send a runner to get the literal commander of all the forces in Afghanistan of NATO. Then they had to bring him up to speed on what was happening, answer all his questions, and then get the authorization from him to strike the building. The entire time, I'm fuming. We have the capability to stop what we're watching right now, and we're not using it. That's what our mission was. Our purpose is to save ground parties' lives. I was seeing red. Like, it's the most mad I've ever been in my life. Going through that experience, I actually know that there's a difference between like anger and like wrath. That's what I was feeling. Like, I felt like I could just rip out the side of the fuselage of the gunship, jump down out of the sky, and like fucking sucker punch these Taliban in the face. That's how mad I was that I would do something irrational like that. And so we eventually got the authorization to strike this building. Not 2 rounds into the 105 and like a couple 40s out of the 40 millimeter, we get this ceasefire call. And I'm like, the fuck are we doing? Let's level that bitch, turn it into a fucking dirt parking lot. Then they come over and they're like, women and children are squirting from the building. Which squirting just means run away. At that moment I was like, what? No. There's terrorists in there. There's no women and children. What the fuck? What? Couldn't process it. And I don't know, man. I've thought about that like multiple times over like the course of my life. It's like, what could we have done to like prevent that? That was a perfect ambush on their part. From the setup to like where they got trapped behind the wall. I think about it and I'm like, the only thing that could have stopped it is if like we didn't get that push, we didn't get that surge, or the ore ended earlier. That was like, I don't know, that was a box that we got stuck into. And I guess I came back from that trip. Well, not I guess. I came back from that trip pretty messed up mentally. I had had this civilian casualty mission. And I knew it was bad because they had to bring in medical evacuation helicopters to like take them out. But I never wanted to know how many there were. It was kind of like a spiral at first. Like the entire time I was deployed, it wasn't affecting me mentally because I had like a mission to direct all my mental attention. But when I came back and after my family had visited me and left, it was like the first time I'd been alone with my thoughts about that mission. And I thought about it and I was like, okay, that's natural. Like it was pretty fucked up. At this point, I'd already kind of like thought, oh, I guess I just don't feel remorse. But truly what the real thing was is like, I was like repressing it all. This mission kind of like built up so much pressure, I couldn't uncork it on my own. I was like, if I can't stop thinking about it, obviously something's wrong about it. I was hesitating at that point to like throw around like the PTSD word. I didn't want to admit that I could have something messed up mentally with myself. I was like, all right, so we're going to do this my way. And I went out and I bought like a 5th of Crown. And I went home and I fucking uncorked it because I knew it was a depressant and I was going to drink it, tap into those feelings, like release the pressure on the dam and just like whatever. Well, that was a bad move because as soon as I unbottled those repressed emotions, basically bawled like a baby for like 4 hours that night. And it didn't really stop after that. I thought like I'd wake up the next morning and, oh, cool, I had like a good cry. It's out of my system. Immediately afterwards, okay, I'm thinking about the mission, but I'm thinking about the mission because I'm thinking about how I uncorked that emotion. And then it was like, okay, stop thinking about the mission. Stop thinking about it. It just bounced around in my head all day for like months. It was bringing me to like my breaking point. Easier for me to admit now than it was then because like I was very prideful. Admitting that I have a mental problem was like never a place I was going to go. It got pretty dark there for a while. I couldn't even like decompress. What I had done before in my free time was like watch movies and play video games, and like I would watch a movie and like think about that mission because there'd be like some small scene that would remind me of like what had happened in the Helmand River Valley. Or I'd play a video game and it'd be violent and I would think about, you know, what happened there. Everything led back to that mission. I couldn't go to like mental health or anything because then I wouldn't be able to fly. They would take me off flying orders to deal with that. It felt like I would be letting down the rest of the gunship community, or I'd be letting down the ground parties deployed. And I realize now that like the Air Force would have always filled my slot, but at the time, like I felt like I owed it to like the taxpayer, to the ground party, to my fellow gunners and the gunship community as a whole for. You know, I felt like I owed everyone without like feeling like I owed myself anything. I was drinking to feel sad and to not think about it. At least when I was drinking, like I felt like I was in control, which really was the dumbest thing to think when I was like going through this, because I wasn't in control of it at all. And drinking was not helping at all. It didn't matter. I was just doing it anyways. Like, I did initially try to drink with other people, but I realized that I wanted to fight other people I drank around, which is a new thing. I drank before that and I was always a happy drunk, but like after this, when I drank, I wanted to fight my friends, special forces guys that I ran into at like the bar. And I realized that like, I don't want to fight my friends and like the other people that I work with. I just kind of withdrew from that party drinking because it wasn't partying anymore for me.
Well, one thing that I thought was really cool that I was reading about is that, like we have this whole concept of like the end of history, right? Or post history. It really kind of originates in this time period with this French mathematician named like A.A. Cournot. And he wrote, he was like kind of looking out on these structures. And he talked about how like society was moving to this place, and this is a quote from him, where history is reduced to an official gazette recording regulations, statistical data, which therefore ceases to be history in the customary sense of the word. A new phase in which people are able to calculate the exact results of a clockwork mechanism. So like, people are always talking about like, history's ended. But like that concept itself is also kind of intimately woven into the emergent structure that we're describing.
Yeah, and you have to think about this in terms of historicism of anybody who studied the history of like sociology or economics. You're aware of the so-called historical school of economics, like of people like Weber.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Is that those people like Max Weber and Simmel, that what it means for them to be historicists is that they're recognizing economic theories as historically contingent, as being products of the contemporary societies. They're using those theories in order to kind of understand their own economic development, and so those it's a reflexive process of these theories and the processes that they try to conceptualize, where they're looping back around with one another and influencing the development of one another.
It's a dialectical relationship, isn't it? In this kind or like a more cybernetic term, like a feedback relationship.
We're Marxists here. I'm
I know. I'm a good Marxist.
Well, I'm just like
but for the cybernetic things out there, throw it in.
Because I think that the dialectical kind of concept, dialectical materialism, is really a very important thing to kind of understand when we start getting on such a theoretical level, the interactions of these different kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that knowledge and the things that we have knowledge about are in a mutually influential relationship with one another.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's very important to know.
Yeah, that's not so much more like.
But I don't know. You're more of a Marx expert. You're like more the Marx head. I really I had a term for you guys. You are always saying all these amazing like English quotes, which really are just amazing. Which that was in the beginning of the last episode. We had a little English quote, which is directly related to what we're talking about now. It's describing the same stuff. Do you remember the intro?
I know you could easily plug that quote in the beginning of this. But I think that what we're describing is kind of exactly what they were so plugged into. Like it's kind of, especially like in like the later parts of Capital. Marx's big emphasis is what he calls on like the centralization and concentration of capital. And when he talks about that, what he's describing is very much like this like tendency towards like massive firms, your economies of scale, your machinery of production that can, produce on scales that previously that had been kind of like unimaginable. And so for him, like this is really kind of like what it's all about, is that, these old ways of doing production, of doing commerce, they, kind of get annihilated under this form that's always increasing in scale and scope.
Yeah, and it's a unification process of centralization. They try and draw together all these different elements, right? And they're, that's the difference here between how things were done previously, because it's so easy to take for granted all of this history that we're talking about now with these, an SA corporation and the French, commercial code and the Credit Mobiliare. It's like, if you look at how things were done, for the most part, like previously or even parallels with this, it's all partnerships. And that was the preferred form. Like, you could form a joint stock company if you wanted to, like, for all this period, going back to 1700 or whatever, before the American Revolution, or people didn't do that. It was an option that they could easily have done, but they didn't do it because they preferred these partnerships as the working formula. And that's just like, you're not a corporation. It's you and another guy or your other partners, and that's it. You are the joint owners of this firm, and the scale of the firm is very limited because of that. And you can't really even pass it along through different generations. A lot of times when one of the partners dies, that's it. The company's just dissolved, and then the person, the survivor, the guy who's left, he just starts another partnership. So this is a very flexible form that's dissolving constantly. And if you have like a law partnership in the 19th century, it's like nepotism is a really big thing too, and how you actually get the people in your office, right? You have like your friend who's from this such and such family, and you want to make a connection with them. You take your friend's son who just got out of law school, and you bring him into your firm. And the way that works is that
listening to this in the background of your Zoom class. I want you to look at the top right corner of your screen. There's a big red X button. I want you to go ahead and click that motherfucker right now. Cut every class you can. Burn your homework. Cast it into the flames. And they'll tell you it's reckless and irresponsible, but just remember what's happened to the generation that preceded you. Over the last few months, tens of millions have filed for unemployment. In response, the White House began a Find Something New jobs program where Ivanka Trump helps people, and I quote, learn a completely new skill because COVID is an opportunity for a new trajectory in their lives. This is the government putting the most positive spin it can on a dark truth. Most of the jobs people lost during this crisis aren't coming back ever. Most of the people losing their jobs will have to start from scratch at the bottom of some new industry, some new company. If these jobs come at all, they will come in the middle of our 5th recession in 2 decades. They are certain to pay less than the jobs they are replacing. The workers themselves, having dedicated most of their productive hours for most of their lives to jobs that no longer exist, developing skills that are no longer relevant, will have less value than ever before to the system. This system will take everything from you, and when it's done, it will discard you. The politicians will say they feel sorry for you, the media will write stories about you, the businessmen will sell you synthetic heroin to make you feel better, but nobody will actually do anything to help you. We are a nation of mercenaries. It is dog eat dog, every man for himself. You know this. This is how it always was. It is our greatest strength and most harrowing weakness. Social Darwinism is the only true God here. You are on your own. Be wary of trusting the conventional wisdom that has led so many others astray. If you want to truly understand the American workers' plight, watch the movie Born on the 4th of July. It documents what it was like to be a Vietnam vet. How as young men there was a tremendous amount of societal pressure to be the American military hero, to serve the country for a higher ideal. How the government portrayed the fight as a noble battle between the forces of good and evil. These belief systems coerced young men by the tens of thousands. They wanted to make the world a better place. They wanted to make long term. But society was wrong, and the government was lying. Instead, these men were left traumatized with the things they had done and the things that had happened to them. It didn't take long for everyone to give up on the war, but by then it was too late. We had sunk too much into it to turn back. Nobody wanted to admit we had made a mistake, so we kept at it for years, even after it was so clearly a lost cause. People stopped volunteering, so the system drafted thousands more against their will under threat of imprisonment. But we lost. It was all for nothing. And when the vets got home, they were broken, psychologically destabilized, limbless, and paralyzed. And the system that had coerced them left them to die. The war's opponents thought they were monsters. The war's advocates couldn't bear to acknowledge them. They became a collective monument to our national shame, to how foolish we had been, to the pain we had caused. They made us sad. We just wanted them to go away. It was their own damn fault. It was their problem, not ours. There was no sympathy. There was no health care. There were no veterans charities or politicians worried about taking care of vets. They were too disabled to work, so we left them. the same thing is happening to another generation of young men who've grown old and are killing themselves in numbers greater than all the lives we lost in the real Vietnam combined. They fought, and these 40 or 50-year-olds must have fought so hard for so long, no relief ever came, just left them there to die alone. And the media will come up with clever, alliterative nicknames like Deaths of Despair. Comedy shows will make fun of the farm execs who got hooked on heroin before they died, and the politicians who say they can save in exchange for a vote, but nobody will actually do anything. American capitalism has become its own Vietnam. Like Vietnam, victory is always right around the corner. It's more money, a new car, it's a bigger house, it's that next promotion. Like Vietnam, victory never comes, because these things can't make you happy. The data tells us this, the people who've actually gotten that stuff tell us this. Like Vietnam, there's a great deal of cultural pressure and government strong-arming to participate exactly the way they tell you, even if it's not actually in your best interest. And like Vietnam, you will be left wounded. Pain is not weakness leaving the body. Pain is your body telling you it's sustaining damage. This is as true for pain in your mind and heart as it is your body. To fix this pain, we engage in self-destructive behavior, addiction, negligence, infidelity, and end up when you're feeling worse. Anger is a chemical response to pain, and unsurprisingly, a deep, ungovernable rage has manifested itself throughout all American society. We believe mistakenly that everything would be better if we could just destroy the people who don't think like us. And all the meanwhile, we can't shed the true source of our pain, our fucking jobs, because then everyone would think we were irresponsible losers and we can't even work less, because that would mean buying less things, and then we start cutting jobs, because everything we buy justifies somebody else's survival, because if as a society, we stop rapidly replacing our cars, clothes, and furniture every couple of years, if companies built their products to last, if we tried to make our products last, most of the country will starve to death by now. We dedicate most of our lives to a job, building skills for an industry, and one day a virus or a new technology will come along and wipe the industry out, and the only things we are good at will be irrelevant, and we will be left crippled just as if we were in a wheelchair, useless to the system. Because our lives do not have value if we do not have something to trade. And like Vietnam, the system will discard us. They will repo our cars, evict us from our homes, and liquidate our assets down to the clothes on our back to pay off the predatory student loan debts we aren't allowed to declare bankruptcy on. Just like in 08, just like right now. We are at this very moment sowing the seeds for the next wave of deaths of despair. One thing everything agreed on in 2016 was that Trump's election was an expression of rage. Everyone was like, wow, Trump voters are really pissed off. And Trump voters were like, yeah, we're really pissed off. Commentators were calling it, and I quote, a primal strain of rage. And what was most remarkable about that was that the bulk of his support came from the older, from the boomers. The boomers who came up when the economy was actually doing really well. So remember, if you want to be like them, if you want to end your life screaming in primal rage, go ahead and do it how they did. Go to school, get a job, work hard, build your 401k. Or you could try something else.